graduated, one second. When I graduated, I started doing a mixture of freelancing, but also I did work employed in like a marketing capacity as a photographer. I did that for about 5 years, and then after that, I started freelancing fully, and I did that probably for another 5 years, 6 years, something like that. And then I got asked to shoot some video by a client that I work with a lot. And then at that time, of course, it was, you know, the DSLR era where people were exploring that. So I started playing around with that a little bit, and that started to get me a better understanding of just basic video production, I suppose. And then from there, from those early videos, that was doing kind of very, very like low budget music videos and music promos and stuff like that, which I did a lot of, which was a really good way to kind of understand the elements of what goes into a production, especially as a solo shooter at that point. And realizing obviously the importance of having a crew and the amount of work that goes into something when you want it to meet a certain production standard. From there, alongside doing that, I started doing kind of more kind of corporate video, I suppose, and kind of I don't think at that point it wasn't really sort of like the content generation, I suppose, but it was kind of like corporate video and content for businesses. And then I met a few directors who started working on, you know, larger budget productions, and still very much in the commercial space, but they had a small network of production companies and agencies that they worked for. So we would go along often times as kind of like a team. So they would be like a self-shooting director DP, but wanting to move into, say, directing. So then I would then take the DP role, and then they would direct. And then from there, it just kept growing with that, you know, with every job we did, that could lead to either more of the same with that client, or new clients would see that work and they would want some of that as well.
You say you're building up your portfolio then is really important as DoP.
Yeah, exactly. Ultimately, you're only as good as the last thing you did, and it's always trying to like look for the next opportunity, really. Certainly in that world, you could find that, you know, something that we often found was that there were times where, you know, you might shoot something that you really, really liked, and then say the client, you know, internally, you know, they might have had sort of a change in their creative direction or something like that, and the project might not be released, which of course then you're kind of embargoed to not share that work, and not have it necessarily in your portfolio, which is always a bit of a blow, because if you did something you're really proud of, then you're thinking, well, this is like a gateway to, you know, getting more work of this kind if it's an area we've not explored before, or it's an area that we're particularly interested in working in. So yeah, ultimately portfolio was really important. That said, I mean, I would probably jump in the gun a little bit, but that said, you know, you don't have to necessarily be limited by the work you're doing to build your portfolio. Something that I need to be more active in is probably exploring, you know, shooting spec projects or shooting work purely for myself, in order to sort of fill gaps where, you know, maybe it's an area I've not shot before, or maybe it's a subject matter I've not covered before. Trying to fill those holes in my portfolio where you just take it under your own self-directed approach, working with either with a director or with a crew, and trying to do something because you all want to have that in your portfolio, and you kind of make it yourself in order to highlight that you can do it. And that kind of covers it in terms of where I am now. So to summarize, started out shooting low budget stuff, started getting paid for that stuff more properly, then started finding other people that were doing stuff that was similar, and then in my case it was directors or people who were kind of shooting directors, and then working with them, doing more good work, and then getting to a stage where we were getting regular client work with agencies and production companies.
That was a good answer. So would you also say it's important to have a lot of contacts within the industry then, if you're looking for work?
Yeah, I think I probably found that that's probably the key thing, really. So, and again, something that really I'm always trying to get better at is just networking with other similar individuals, or certainly from a DP's point of view, finding directors that are on your wavelength and have a similar approach to the work that they do, whether that be stylistically or similar sensibilities and tastes, that kind of thing. Certainly for a DP's point of view, if you can find and gel with directors that are like-minded, and you get on with, and then hopefully cultivate projects either with them or whether that's through a paid engagement, or whether that's shooting something together just to test the waters, then that can be quite valuable.
So can you almost work in a partnership with a director where you apply for certain roles together?
Well, I mean, in my case, there's one particular director that I work with who, in our case, it is almost like a partnership in a sense, in that we work together almost exclusively. But not to say we don't work with other people, we do, but it's just that oftentimes the director will be the first port of call on the job, and if he gets requested to write a treatment for a project, often he'll call me and say, I've had this come in, this is kind of the direction I'm thinking of taking it in, what do you think? And obviously I'd like you to work on it with me. So yeah, I mean, that's really, really valuable. I mean, I suppose in the commercial space, DPs tend to sort of bounce around and work with lots of different directors. In my case, I've just found that there's one or two people that I work with regularly, which I quite liked. It's almost like you're in the end, it's almost like working with your friends, but that isn't to say that's an ideal way of working, because having multiple people that you can have on the end of a phone is always useful, because everybody gets the odd dry spell. So it's like anything, isn't it? Having irons in different fires, you've got to kind of keep those fires burning in order to stay working, because obviously if you're not working, it can be a bit difficult. But that translates up. You see feature DPs and directors often return to each other. They always tend to sort of see the same people crop up together. The likes of Seamus McGarvey and Joe Wright, or Roger Deakins and the Coen brothers, or whoever, that you tend to get partnerships come back together for different projects.
Okay. So in terms of the role itself, what would you say your main responsibilities are on set? Is it carrying out the director's creative vision, or is it managing the kit, or is it more about managing the cast, or is it a balance between all those factors?
Certainly not. Certainly not managing the cast. that's very much the director's domain. But I would say it's difficult to like pick out one particular thing that's like the main responsibility, because there's so many factors. I mean, ultimately, first and foremost, carrying out the director's vision is ultimately your job. But in order to do that, you have to assemble and manage your camera team, your camera unit. So your first and second AC, they report to you, and they're absolutely invaluable, and keeping them motivated and happy, and entrusting them and empowering them to support you and do great work will only serve the project. Adjacent to that, you obviously got the lighting department, so gaffer and sparks, and then the electricians that are on set. Again, it's very much the same as with the camera department. You need to sort of kind of keep them informed of the direction in which the project's going, and communication is another massive factor. Being clear and concise in what we're doing and how we're going to execute it, and what's needed to be done in order to do that well. So far as equipment goes, some DPs are quite kind of fastidious about how things are done and what's used and why it's used. I'd probably sit in the middle in a sense. So on the one hand, I could have like a particular taste for a certain camera or certain set of lenses or certain lights, but ultimately I would kind of refer to say my first AC and say, think about using these lenses. What do you think? Creatively, they do this. Operationally, do they work well for you? If it's lights, I might have a particular type of light that I like, or a light that I think might work for a shot or a scene or whatever. I would then float that to my gaffer and say, what do you think to that? This is an approach I was thinking of. He may go, yeah, great, that sounds perfect. Or he also might go, oh, that sounds good, but however, have you thought about X problem that could occur? Or that's a great fixture, however, there's this other one that maybe would give us a little bit more flexibility. What do you think? And so I think another strength to being a DP is being able to listen as well. And as much as it's about sort of managing your teams, it's also about kind of being open to conversation with them and kind of getting their feedback and making sure that you're kind of taking on board their breadth of knowledge as well. Because, ultimately no one in any crew can know everything. And it's just about bouncing those ideas backwards and forwards and coming to the right solutions.
Okay. And so you mentioned like first AC and all these other roles in the camera hierarchy. Would it be possible to start off on like a lower role, so start off as like a camera production assistant and then work your way up through that hierarchy?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I would say as a starting point, being a PA is a great place to be, in the sense that the barrier to entry on a set is quite low at a PA. So as long as you're enthusiastic, willing, happy, keep a good attitude, and you've got a lot of common sense and kind of just being able to be useful ultimately. There's no reason why you couldn't get on set as a PA. But then when you're on set, the great thing there is that you can then make friends with people. You can be useful to people. You can kind of solve people's problems. If someone needs something and they're in the middle of something else, you can go grab it for them, and just sort of solve little problems for people all day, or anticipate things. It sounds silly, but it could be something as stupid as I don't know, you notice a crew member's got a headache or something, and you go and get them some water and some paracetamol or something, and they'll be so thankful for that, because they're probably not in a position where they can sort of down tools and just go and get that. Yeah. So at that point, come wrap, you might say, oh, I really enjoyed PAing, it was great to meet you. kind of interested in becoming a camera trainee, do you need anybody? And so then you can go, this is my experience so far. I've shot a couple of bits. If there's any opportunity to come and trainee on your camera team, then I'd love to. And then you're in the door and you're networking then. So again, comes back to building your network.
Okay. So when you're on set, what is the typical set etiquette? Like how would you behave if you're on a shoot?
Ultimately, your skills and your ability, at the point of which you've been hired, that's kind of a given. Then it's kind of an assumed level, isn't it? Once you're on the set, in terms of how you do your job, it's already kind of a given that you've been trusted to do the work. So I think once you're there, I think largely it's set etiquette for me would be a combination of being kind of positive and quite can do, and about finding sort of solutions if there are any areas that are problematic. So positivity, I would say, kind of being quite detail oriented, and kind of I would say like quite kind of paying attention to detail and just making sure that things are done well. I would also say, communication, going back to that, being able to communicate clearly and concisely, and make sure that you're not leaving things out in any kind of grey area. Just like kind of be quite clear in your intentions. Listening, massively important. I think people often say, like, on sets, it's like knowing when to speak and when not to speak. If there's somebody that's in a department head who's kind of engaging with the crew, make sure you're listening to what they're saying. It's likely going to be important. I would say being just really sensible when it comes to safety. That could be anything. That could be, if you see a hazard, maybe raise it with the first AD. If there's anything that feels like you're being asked to do that's sort of unsafe, again, maybe question that. Knowing who to speak to, which in almost all cases is going to be either your department head or the first AD, rather than sort of running straight to the director and flagging something with them. Maybe it's not the right thing to do. In the DP's role, possibly, if it's something that they've requested and, possibly is, going to impact something else in the day, you could maybe bring the director and the first AD together and discuss that with them and say, kind of, this is what we're trying to do. However, I've kind of thought about it, and maybe this could be a problem, in the next shot or in the next scene or the next hour of the day. Is there another way we can make it work? What else? Largely just sort of, I think, trying to motivate others is quite important. As much as everything can go really well on a lot of shoots, other shoots you can be really up against it. And if it's a challenging shoot, or it's stressful, or maybe you've had a really early call time or whatever, and people are tired and kind of a bit grumpy or whatever, trying to keep things light and motivated and keep the vibe up, because ultimately everybody wants to do good work and everyone wants to go home feeling like it was a really good day, rather than going home thinking, oh, that was awful. So yeah, just trying to be positive and upbeat is quite good.
Okay. So what type of kit would you generally use? Does it depend on the production, or like what would be your go-to kit?
Totally depends on the production. So I might have sort of preferences for stuff, but you might not be able to have it through, it could be a budget concern. It could be that kit, as much as you like it, doesn't quite fit for the job you're on. For example, I'd love to use an Alexa Mini or Alexa Mini LF, on every shoot. But then some shoots, maybe you need something that goes particularly high speed, or maybe you need something that's smaller and lighter, or maybe you need something that's cheaper. Maybe you need something that maybe you need something that can fit in a smaller space, or like, for example, one of the last jobs I did, it was a 5-day shoot, where we had quite a sizable crew. The client had a good budget, but it wasn't anything like what we thought it would need. And so when it came to kind of looking at crewing and where we could save money on crew, that became a bit tricky because we got limited to where we knew we needed a certain number and skill set of people. It was like, well, our initial quote included an Alexa Mini. In the end, it came down to looking at that cost over 5 days, knowing that also we needed a jib op for sort of, certainly we felt 4 of the 5 days, but then we elected to have the jib op for 3. And it was like, okay, we still can't afford the Alexa. But both myself and the director have cameras. And it was like, well, we could pitch our cameras to the client and say, look, we've got these 2 cameras, these are their sensors, maybe we could look at using one of those. He had a Sony FX9, I had a Blackmagic Ursa G2. They elected for the Ursa image because they quite liked that. And so by using my camera over our preferred camera, it was going to save us in the region of £2,000, which meant we could have the jib op for an extra day, and we could also pay a loader for the last 2 days as well.
Yeah.
So whilst it wasn't ideal in our minds, actually in the end we got better crew out of it for a longer term, and in the end, by the time it went through the grade, it didn't look anything out of place at all anyway. So yeah, that's something you have to consider. Like something I did just before Christmas, I did a job which was for a French production company that were working for a client out in Hong Kong, and a member of their team had come over to London to attend some events, and they wanted to put together like a high-end travel film, kind of like a vlog in a sense, but like a more of a highbrow version of that, to use on their social media platforms. We knew we were going to be running around London, and it was like, well, clearly any kind of built out cinema camera is just going to be ridiculous because we're filming in places that don't have permits, we're filming in places that are packed with people. In the end, what do we use? And so we used a tiny little Sony FX3 because it was light, it was small, it had good low light performance because we couldn't carry lights everywhere with us. So it was going to be very run and gun, and it worked fine. Yeah, great autofocus. That I didn't need an AC. We could keep the crew really small, so it ended up just being me and a sound operator. So,
and also in terms of kit, do you tend to use cameras that you've used before, or are you told we're going to be using this camera and you've never used it before, and would you then have to do a test shoot with it, or are your skills very much transferable between the cameras?
I would say the basic principle of cameras are that, if you understand exposure, just that they, moving from camera to camera system is by and large kind of not a big deal. Ideally, you'd always use something that you've used before, and typically it's more to do with the fact that you particularly like that sensor, or you particularly like the ergonomics of that camera or whatever. But there are going to be times where for whatever reason, maybe the directors decided to shoot on a certain camera, or maybe the production can only afford this, or maybe the production company happens to own something that they want to use, or whatever it is. But ultimately, if you've not used it before, in an ideal world, if you've got your camera team in play, you often find that camera assistants tend to find that they've used most things at some point. So you've obviously got the backup there. But if you haven't used it before, I would say that you've got several options. If you want to familiarize yourself with the camera before using it, if you've not used it, certainly it's not an issue if you haven't used it, and there's no harm in saying so. You can't have used every single piece of kit. So what I would do if it was me, I would either contact, let's say the directors decided they want to shoot on a certain camera because there's some shots they want to pull off that require that camera, whether it be a spec thing or a size thing or whatever it is. I would go, okay, we'll use that camera. I'd contact the rental house that maybe we're thinking of hiring from. You can go into one of their test facilities, a test room, try the camera out, get it on a set of sticks, get a lens on it, and then just go and familiarize yourself with the operation of it. Or I certainly know this is the case for ARRI. I don't know about some of the other brands, but there's online kind of like simulators. So for example, ARRI have like an online menu simulator, so you can go on the website and it just basically brings up a screen that looks exactly the same as what it looks like on the LCD on the camera. Mm-hmm. And then you can just start pressing buttons and see where everything is, go through the menu. I mean, I think the menu systems is the main issue, I think, with any camera system. Anything that's on the body of the camera, buttons and so on, that's like camera to camera, it's pretty much the same. ISO, frame rate, white balance, all that stuff. But when it comes to anything that's deep in a menu for whatever reason, learning those through, ARRI, Canon, Sony, Red, whatever it is, some of them can be quite convoluted. So if you can familiarize yourself with a menu for a simulator, or if that doesn't exist, going into a rental house and just having a play, that can be really good.
Okay. So do you typically bring like any extra equipment with you on set? So would you need SD cards to load into the camera so you can quickly load your settings?
I tend to find, if it's something like, if it's kind of preset kind of preferences, obviously you can save those out if you've got a particular preferred setup. Obviously you can have an SD card. Generally I don't. A lot of the cameras tend to be set up roughly how I like them anyway. So yeah, I don't do that. But in terms of other equipment, I wouldn't bring cards to record onto. That they normally come with the camera if you're renting it. I bring my own bits and pieces. I have kind of like a unit bag that I take with me, which in that I have things like I have a few little on-set tools, like I'll always have like a screwdriver and some Allen keys, that kind of thing, just because you never know. Obviously, if you've got an AC there, they're going to have those things as well. I always bring, some light meters. So I tend to have like a main light meter and a backup light meter. I've got an older color meter, but it doesn't really work well with LED, so I'll be upgrading that at some point. I bring my own monitor, so like a 7-inch monitor, within which I have settings in that which I quite like. So I'll have like pages set up on that, which will have guides or a LUT or my false color and waveforms and stuff. So I can quickly access those things rather than doing it on the camera body.
Yeah.
What else do I bring? Like flashlight, just if you're working in the dark, a little belt with like a pouch on it, just so I can put things in there, like a light meter, and I've got like some viewing glasses for, like a gaffer's glass, just for kind of looking at the sun, or checking clouds, or panning a light into the right spot. Sometimes bring like the odd light with me. Sometimes, if it's something that I know that if it's something that my gaffer hasn't got, or if it's something that if I've not got my regular gaffer, I might just bring along. So I might bring something I quite like to use, I quite like a Source 4 light. So sometimes I'll just put it in the boot of the car just in case I want it. Sometimes like tiny little LEDs, just for like hiding in places if you want them, just to put a little bit of light in a corner somewhere. Generally, I don't bring lights just because my gaffer's normally got everything. So trying to think if there's anything else. Tend to bring a couple of pairs of gloves, one for operating, if like operator's gloves if it's cold. I've got some like heat-proof gloves, which I tend to keep in my bag just in case, like if my gaffer's busy and I just need to quickly like reposition a HMI or a tungsten lamp or something like that. Obviously, if it's hot, I can just quickly reposition it. Yeah, I can't think of anything else particularly.
That's all right.
I bring my own easy rig. If it's like a handheld job, I bring an easy rig and some grips.
Yeah. Okay. So when you so typically the job is mostly freelance, right? When you get a production to work on, what would your typical working schedule look like?
Sorry, say that again.
So what would your like schedule be like? So would it be a very intensive few days of working, or would it be spaced out over a certain time period? So what's the general like working schedule like as a DoP?
It changes, but I mean, like, yeah, say taking a typical kind of commercial job, they can tend to be like anywhere between 1 and a few days, let's say. So typically speaking, prior to the actual job, you will be sort of kind of in a bit of a pre-production phase, which would just be talking to the director, talking to producers, possibly dialing in on client calls, just to kind of shore up last minute details, and certainly with the director, you're going to be kind of nailing down the creative, planning shop lists. Then that will then translate into designing lighting plans, sharing that with the gaffer, then building out a kit list, speaking to rental houses, all of that stuff. That's all like your 9 to 5 kind of day stuff. But of course, you're not doing it necessarily all day, but sometimes you are. So it just really depends on the intensity or the level of the job you're doing, the complexity of it. Shoot days, I mean, again, they drastically vary, but you're unlikely to get a call time before 7 o'clock in the morning, because then you're kind of looking at a night shoot at that point. But call times tend to be anywhere between 7 and 9 a.m. Typically 8 o'clock is fairly standard, but 7 and 9 isn't uncommon. That it just depends on the length of day you need to operate in. It could be that the location you've booked, maybe they close at 5 or something like that, so you have to start earlier. But your days tend to be anywhere between 10 and 12 hours, with an hour lunch break roughly. But I mean, there has been days where you end up doing a 15-16 hour day with travel in there as well. So if you've got a 7 o'clock call or an 8 o'clock call, but the job is 2 hours away, you're leaving the house at sort of 4:30, 5 in the morning, and then you could be then wrapping at 6 or 7, and then you're not getting home till sort of like 8, 9, maybe later.
When you're using your cameras, what are the main skills that you really need? Is it about how to like frame a certain shot? Is using a camera kind of like using a paintbrush but in a like a different medium? Is it that you're trying to frame things in quite an artistic way?
It depends on the job, really. I mean, ultimately, you're always your job is ultimately to your job is to be kind of the you're looking after that image. So whatever we're doing, you want to be making sure that that image not only looks nice and looks, is nice to look at, or is engaging to look at, or is whether it's beautifully composed or beautifully lit. But above all, I suppose it's the fact that that image needs to appropriately reflect the tone or the theme of what you're shooting. I love the idea of, shooting with one light and, making a really nice moody, moody portraiture almost, as it were. But if you're shooting something that's an advert that has to be light and happy and make people feel positive and sell a product, it might be that you have to light something fairly high key and sort of everything light and airy. So I mean, I would say for me, I tend to really think about the theme and tone of what we're shooting. That then sort of dictates the lighting. And then from there, the lighting tends to dictate how I frame things, I would say. But above all, you've got a shot list to refer to. And, whether that's, if it's commercial and the creator's been decided that's the shots that are going to be needed to build an edit that's going to sell this thing, or whether it's a short film that again is shortlisted by the director and you're working to their vision. You're always trying to sort of achieve framing and style and mood that reflects the vision of the project. I don't think there's any one thing that's more important than another, because it all kind of goes hand in hand. I would say that sometimes framing is kind of one of those things where I sometimes find myself, like, with my own taste, I might think, yeah, I quite like this frame, but then sometimes I've had the director say, oh, can we make the camera much lower? Can it be quite a sort of a low angle shot here on this particular member of talent? And that might not really be my taste, but that's kind of what they like. And then I might go, okay, well, let's reframe and we'll do a low angle. And then I would do my best version of a low angle for me, I guess. And then if they like it, then we've met in the middle, and that's fine. But it's also like, camera movement, for example, that handheld stuff seems to have made a real resurgence. Like, that people are using handheld all the time, and some of it, I think, some of it can look quite sloppy. People seem to like this fairly, it feels quite operated, whereas I don't really. I like doing handheld, but I don't like it to feel too operated. Having that subtle human movement to it, I think, is quite nice, because it feels like you're a witness and you're there in the scene. But then at the same time, if you start seeing the camera move in a way which feels like there's an operator there, it can be a bit distracting. But then, saying that, one of the last things I did was mainly on sticks, or it was on a dolly or on a jib. and so any movement was really smooth. And if it didn't need to move, it didn't move, and it was just a lock off, and that worked really well as well. So yeah, I think it just again comes down to kind of just being kind of mindful of what's appropriate to the project, I suppose.
Okay. So when you're working with your camera department, is like how much collaboration is there between all the different members of crew? Is it very much is shooting on an actual big production? Is that very much a collaborative approach?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's everyone's there as part of a machine, and they've all got their job to do.
Would you be like the manager for them? So would you tell them specifically what to do?
In respect of the camera team?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, ultimately you're their head of department, but I would maybe, generally, the first and second ACs, they're responsible for, they're responsible for the equipment, keeping the image sharp, keeping camera logs, camera reports, slating, loading the cards, getting the cards to the DIT to get them backed up. I don't really direct any of that. But then saying that, the camera teams that I've worked with, they're really great, and they're really self-directed, and they just take their role, and they know their role, and they just do it. And half the time they're doing stuff that you don't even see, because they're just they're so on it that you don't need to ask them to do anything often, because they're just doing it because it's what they do. Saying that, there might be things where, for example, if you're doing a particular move with the camera, you might sort of communicate that to the AC, and if it's something that you decided you want to try, you'd maybe run it by the director, and then let the AC know, oh, by the way, we're going to do a little push in here, or we're going to pan and push over here, and then just to give them that heads up, just so they can maybe have the opportunity to audition the move, just so they can just get their marks or whatever it is. In that case, with the loader, for example, you might communicate to them that this particular shot we're going to go off speed for some slow motion or something, so they might need to just double check the settings on the camera, or check the card space to make sure that if we're shooting high speed, is there enough space on the card? Do we need to change it out and get that onto the DIT and put a fresh card in, that kind of thing? So it all comes back to communication. So it's never about it's certainly never about sort of you're not really telling anyone what to do. You're just communicating and letting people know where we are and what we're doing next. And most of the time they're then being able to interpret that clearly, and then, prep up for the next shot, and make sure that the kit is ready and nearby for whatever it is we're going to need.
Okay. Have there been any innovations in the role, and what have their impacts been? So, for example, has there been the development of kit? Has that changed the role, or has there been a change of practice and its impact, or change of culture to the role?
Yeah, there's a few different things. So in terms of kit, obviously there's been the rise of larger format camera systems, which is quite good. One of the good things there is that I think, certainly from a commercial perspective, any kind of digital content or TV ads or anything like that, because a lot of the stuff that's being shot for commercial purposes tends to have to run across multi-platforms. So whether it's TV or whether it's something that's going to be a YouTube ad or whatever it is, guaranteed it's going to end up on a phone at some point. So you often find that a lot of directors and a lot of clients are wanting you to shoot wider than you potentially would do, because they want the room to crop images to then repurpose for social media and all the rest of it. And obviously with Super 35, one of the issues there is that unless you're shooting particularly shallow, if you're shooting wider, the perceived depth of field and separation is less. So by introducing larger format camera systems, that's one of the things that can, aid there, which is quite good. You can use a given focal length and have a wider field of view naturally, but still maintain depth of field. That's quite nice. Volume, LED volumes are quite interesting. I haven't shot on one myself, but I have worked on them because next to being a DoP, I do also sometimes gaffer and sometimes spark for my actual gaffer if I'm quiet and I'm not working. And I just use that as an opportunity to be out lighting stuff, because it's just another opportunity to sort of exercise that part of your brain. So I've been on some LED volumes, sort of stuff that's been used on like the Mandalorian and Boba Fett and things like that. And so the LED volumes are interesting, certainly in terms of, from my experience when I gaffered those, just the amount of lights you don't need to use. Obviously, if you've got a scene which is taking place against the volume, and whether that's, it could be in a warehouse that's got loads of windows, or it could be a an outdoor location that's on the screen. The fact that you can place the sun where you want it to go, that's interesting. And then all you need to do is wrap that light artificially with your cinema lights to kind of reflect what's going on in the scene behind. Or if it's an interior scene, so you've got a whole load of windows down one side of a warehouse shot, and you've got talent to light. You light your talent, you key your talent, but you've also then not got to have a load of HMIs down the side of that building lighting through those windows, because those windows are in the LED volume, and you can push light through the world that you've built in Unreal Engine. So yeah, you can use a lot less lights in that environment. In terms of culture, I think certain things are changing, in that I think that there is slowly becoming a bit more respect to working hours and thinking about crew. And if you're having a late wrap and then an early call time, but they've also got to factor in travel, if you've got crew that are only getting sort of 4 hours sleep or whatever, that's probably not very good. So I think that's slowly becoming a little bit more responsible. And there's various safety organizations that have come about, namely the Mark Milson Foundation, which was founded after the unfortunate death of a camera operator and DP, Mark Milson, who was killed a few years ago when a stunt went wrong. But they have recently sort of done questionnaires out to the industry about safety and common problems on sets, whether it be working hours, or whether it be just unsafe practices, or whether it be asking people to do things that are outside of their job description, or whatever it is, and just sort of kind of mitigating any problems that could lead to sort of any injury or loss or tragedies. So that's becoming more of a hot topic. And obviously, namely, last year there was the death of Helena Hutchins, who was shot on set with a live firearm. So things like that are being taken way, way more seriously, as they should. I think also sort of inclusivity, whether that's making sure that your crew, is more diverse, a fairer mix of genders, a fairer mix of races, and not that any of these things need to be done, deliberately in such a way where, you would actively be seeking out, people of a certain gender or race, but it's much more just sort of, just being more mindful and looking around on set and saying, if you've got an overwhelming percentage of people that are white or male or whatever it is, just trying to be mindful that if you're getting anybody asking you to, be on your crew or looking for opportunities, if they come from, whether they're from ethnic backgrounds, or if they're from underprivileged backgrounds, or if they're, if you get someone if you get a female that is interested in sparking or gaffering, you'll get some people historically who would be like, oh yeah, girls can't do that. It's like, well, they totally can, and they do. So just make sure that you're kind of making sure that opportunities are open to everybody, really.
Yeah. So you had listed on your CV some of the skills involved and the qualities involved with being a DoP. Would you like to run me through what are your like key skills for being a DoP?
That's here. Let me pull it up just to make it easier.
I mean, some of the things you've listed are problem solving, preparation, proficiency, communication, inclusivity, being passionate, respectful. Yeah, would you just like to talk me through those a little bit?
Yeah, I probably touched on them a little bit already. But yeah, so problem solving, just finding practical, creative, budget-friendly solutions is what I put. So that's oftentimes you're going to get requested to do certain things to achieve a certain shot, or that might be that there's a particular piece of equipment that we think we want, and for example, recently had a job where it was a case of we wanted to do some particular moves, and we thought, well, is this a job where we might need something like might need, say, a technocrane or something like that. In the end, we opted for a jimmy jib, because I knew of a particular operator who was an owner operator of a jimmy jib, and that meant that we could use that as a it could be a dolly, it could be a crane, and it meant that we could move it a lot quicker. It didn't need as many operators, so it was cheaper. And it was just way more flexible. So, it was just going in, like, for example, going into your knowledge and thinking, well, we could do this way. Are there any alternative ways to make this more cost effective, save time, and reduce any kind of impact on set, in terms of, have we got the space to operate this? Is it going to be quick to deploy? That kind of thing. That then feeds into like preparation, doing your research, whatever you're planning on shooting, whatever job you've got coming up, just make sure you prep it. That comes down to being really clear with the director about the shot list, making sure you've got that locked in, know exactly what you're going to be doing when you're there. I try not to wing things on the day. There's nothing to say you can't change your mind on set. If something presents itself and you think, oh, actually, this is a really good idea, we should do that, that's totally cool. But do as much preparation as you can, because if you spent the time in pre-production, you're going to give yourself and everyone else a much easier time when you're there doing it. In terms of proficiency, we kind of touched on that earlier about kind of learning different cameras and so on. I think just always sort of, if you can, sort of just keep yourself relatively educated as to the technologies that are coming out and emerging. You don't have to know the ins and outs of all of it, but you're certainly having your finger on the pulse as to what's out there. And if you get the opportunity to go to a demo day, or go to a rental house and try it out, that's always really good. Again, having your camera team around you that if they've tried things, tap into their knowledge, and from their experience, if it's something that you might want to use in the future, what's its pros and cons, are there any pitfalls, that kind of thing. Again, we talked about communication quite a bit, just being clear, being nice. If you can let somebody know something in advance, that's always good. Like, don't leave things to the last minute. Keeping the crew informed, ultimately. That just really helps everyone do their best job. Again, we touched on inclusivity just now. Just having a balanced crew is always really good. It does actually create a much better vibe. I think if you get too much of any one type of person on set, you can find that you end up with frictions and kind of, some people could be a bit at odds with each other. But having a wide, diverse crew is just really good. Makes it fun, makes it more interesting. Learning from others and getting their perspective on things, people who've come from different backgrounds or worked in different places, they've all got a different perspective on things, and sometimes you might learn something or approach something in a way that you didn't think you would previously, which is quite nice.
Yeah.
Obviously, you've got to have a passion. If you're starting work really early and finishing really late, and often you'll go to a set or a job that might have the best planning that you could have put into it, but you might come up against a problem that could potentially derail things, and you've got to work around that. You've got to be passionate, otherwise it would drive you crazy. So as much as from the outside looking in, people can think, oh, it's like a really cool job, which it is, but it has problems just like most jobs. And also in some respects, some of the problems you can face, it's not often the problem that's the issue, it's the fact that you've also got sort of 30 people behind you going, what are we going to do about it? And you've got to figure it out, which obviously is stressful, and they are all there to help, and everybody wants to make it work. But in a moment where if something's not working and you have to figure it out, or come up with an idea that can patch a hole in something that's the shot just wasn't working for whatever reason, it can be stressful. So just try and maintain that passion.
So I realize it's coming up to 10 o'clock, so I'll just ask one more thing. So what are your future plans as a DOP? Are you planning to do higher budget projects, or are you comfortable where you are now, or you may be looking to also diversify your roles and maybe also do some more work as like a gaffer, or maybe as a shooting producer director? So yeah, what are your plans basically?
I think for me, I don't really have any desire to direct just at this stage. I'm quite happy as a DOP. I would say I'm starting to shoot a level of commercial work now that I quite like, that enables sort of a bit more creativity and working with a crew size which is really productive. I'd like to do more of that. Saying that, I have over the last year and a half or so, a couple of short films, which were okay, and I'd like to do more shorts, with the view to build a portfolio of narrative drama, which I can then hopefully start talking to directors in the future about maybe looking to move into feature work. Because whilst I like the commercial world, ultimately I think I'd like to be shooting drama in the longer term. So yeah, that's ultimately my long-term goal, is to build a stronger network in that world, and get some more shorts in my portfolio.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much for this, by the way. This is brilliant.